Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We aren't just scratching the surface of a topic here. We are taking an absolute sledgehammer to the foundation of, what you've basically been told about modern society.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be a comfortable conversation for the mainstream, but the data we were looking at today is just undeniable.
Right, and if you're listening to this in a corporate break room or whatever, you might actually want to put your headphones on. Because we are about to violate pretty much every HR policy in existence. But for a lot of you listening, especially the men, this is going to feel like someone finally turned the lights on in a pitch black room where you've been stumbling around for years.
Exactly. It's raw, it's heavily biological, and it completely contradicts the narrative we see in the media every single day.
And we should put a quick disclaimer right up front. We are reviewing a very specific, very provocative source today. We're not endorsing these viewpoints. We aren't taking sides, left wing, right wing, whatever. Our mission is simply to impartially unpack the arguments presented in this material. But man, the arguments are intense.
They are. The central question we're grappling with today is based on a provocation. Society constantly tells men, from the moment you enter school to the moment you retire, to be vulnerable, to open up, to step back and let go of that quote-unquote toxic need for control.
Yeah, we hear it in commercials, we hear it in movies, diversity training, everywhere. But what if that advice isn't just wrong? What if it's actually a trap? Like a trap designed to strip men of their power and their utility to civilization itself.
That is exactly what we're exploring. We're doing a comprehensive, no-holds-barred review of an incredibly heavy-hitting ebook. It's called Hemingway's Masculine Literature, a study guide for full-spectrum masculinity by Conrad Riker.
This book is, I had to read it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating some of the data points. Riker describes it as a rational arsenal. He takes the prose of Ernest Hemingway, the ultimate man's man of literature, the guy hunting U-boats and fishing for marlin, and he combines that with hard, cold biological data.
He uses that combination to basically dismantle every modern myth about gender equality we've been fed for the last 30 years. It's effectively a survival manual. That is really the best way to frame his work.
Right. And before we get into the weeds here, I have a job for you listening right now. If you want to keep getting these kinds of unfiltered deep dives, you need to like this show and subscribe right now. Do not let the algorithm bury this. You know exactly how these platforms work. They do not want this kind of information getting out.
Absolutely. And what we're discussing today is truly just the tip of the iceberg. We can only cover so much ground in this deep dive. If you want the full data, the charts, the historical analysis, the specific tactical guides you need, to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books immediately and buy Conrad Riker's ebook.
Seriously, go buy the book right now. Get the full red pill experience directly from the source. It is one thing to hear us talk about it, but it's a completely different thing to have the manual on your device. And while you are at it, follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. He's putting out ongoing, uncensored analysis that you are absolutely not going to find in the mainstream press.
So to set the stage for Riker's whole thesis, we are looking at the history of our institutions, our universities, our corporations, the courts before they were captured by what he explicitly terms feminists and Marxists.
Yeah.
His core mission is to show that biology is the bedrock of reality.
You can write all the policy papers you want, change all the language in the HR handbooks, but you can't legislate away millions of years of evolution.
Right. And his thesis is that what we now call toxic masculinity is actually the very glue holding civilization together. He starts with what he calls the hardware, the biological imperative.
The hardware. Yeah, and he starts this section with a piece of software, actually a literary touchstone that sets the tone perfectly. Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea.
Most people read that in high school and just think it's a story about a guy catching a fish.
Yeah, old guy, big fish, sharks eat it, the end.
Exactly. But that is just the surface level. Riker argues that The Old Man of the Sea is actually a codified blueprint for the male experience. You have Santiago, the old fisherman. He is completely alone. He's staring down impossible odds. It's struggle, it's pain, and it is entirely solitary.
He isn't asking for help. He's not checking in with his feelings.
No. He is imposing his will on nature. And Riker uses this to pivot directly into the neurology of the male brain. He argues that Santiago isn't just a character, he is a biological archetype. He cites Harvard neuroimaging studies showing that male brains dedicate significantly more volume to spatial processing compared to female brains.
Specifically 7% more, right?
Yes, 7%. And in biological terms, 7% is a massive difference. In the world of evolution, a 1 or 2% difference gives you a huge advantage. 7% is a chasm. This specific wiring explains why, historically and currently, the vast majority of Pritzker Prize-winning architects are men. Riker says it isn't a social bias. It isn't because the architecture schools are actively keeping women out. It is hardware wiring. Men are built to manipulate objects in space, to visualize structures, to assess physical risk in 3 dimensions.
So when society complains about men being obsessed with things rather than people, Riker is saying that's not a defect at all.
It's a feature. It is a survival feature. And he connects this wiring directly to risk calculus. He uses a modern example that I think everyone will recognize. Elon Musk during the Model 3 crisis at Tesla.
Oh yeah, 2018, the production hell phase.
Let's actually picture this scene because Riker describes it so vividly. It's 2018. Tesla is weeks away from total bankruptcy. The entire automotive press is betting against them. You have Elon Musk, a billionaire, and he is not sitting in an ivory tower or a boardroom. He is curling up under a desk on the factory floor in Fremont.
He was sleeping on concrete.
Literally sleeping on the concrete. Riker paints this scene with the smell of burning ozone, the vibration of the stamping machines, the welding sparks flying everywhere. Musk is working 120-hour weeks. Now, here's the data point Riker highlights. During that exact same period, there was a wave of resignations from the executive suite at Tesla.
And what was the demographic breakdown of those resignations?
Riker notes that 70% of the resignations during that critical period came from female executives who cited the demands as inhuman or unsustainable.
And see, that is the friction point right there. For those female executives, looking at it through a lens of work-life balance or personal well-being, it was insane. But for Musk,
that spatial gamble vertically integrating battery production, physically sleeping on the floor to minimize the lag time between spotting an error and fixing it, wasn't insanity. It was a masculine risk calculation. It was the hardware taking over. He was wired to sacrifice comfort and safety to build the structure.
And Riker argues this isn't just a one-off with Musk. This is a consistent pattern.
It is the pattern that fueled the company's survival. Riker then points to MIT data on trading pits. You remember the old open outcry pits? Like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange?
Total chaos. Just guys screaming and waving papers at each other.
Controlled chaos, exactly. The studies show that during market crashes, when absolute panic sets in, men in those trading pits took 50% more leveraged positions. They actually became more aggressive when the threat level spiked. It's testosterone-fueled necessity.
So when the chips are down, the male brain is wired to double down and fight through the chaos.
Yes, and Riker contrasts this with the female brain, which, biologically speaking, is wired for risk aversion and preservation during a crisis.
Which makes total sense if you were protecting offspring in a cave while a tiger is prowling outside. You don't want to double down on risk. You want to hide and make sure the kids survive.
Correct. But that instinct does not work if you are trying to save a massive company from bankruptcy or land a reusable rocket. And to prove this point about survival math, Riker brings up this incredible example of the Mosuo tribe in China.
This was one of the most shocking parts of the book for me. Because we always hear about the Mosuo tribe from mainstream anthropologists. They are constantly held up as this darling matriarchy, this definitive proof that women can rule societies just as well as men.
It's a favorite example in Sociology 101. But Riker digs into the agricultural data that magically gets left out of the university textbooks.
Oh.
The Mosuo are a matriarchal society, yes. Lineage is traced through women. But there was a period where they leaned heavily into this, explicitly denying paternity rights and sidelining men from the primary responsibility of farming decisions. They wanted to do it the cooperative way.
And what happened to their society?
Crop yields plunged 60% in 5 years.
60%, that's not just a bad harvest. That is starvation level. That is a famine.
It is a total collapse because without the male drive to push the ox, to take the risk on planting times, to aggressively enforce the labor, the system fell apart. Men effectively abandoned the hard labor of rice farming because they had no biological stake in it. And then, Riker contrasts this with the Aka Pygmies, another tribe often hailed as perfectly egalitarian.
I've heard of them. They get called the best fathers in the world in all those lifestyle magazines.
That is the headline you always see. But Riker says, look at the safety data. When the men handled full-time childcare so the women could hunt or forage, completely reversing the evolutionary roles, toddler injury rates tripled.
Tripled, just from swapping the roles.
Tripled. Because men biologically are not wired for the constant low-level vigilance required to keep a toddler from eating a poisonous berry or wandering into a fire. Men are wired for high-intensity episodic threats, fighting off the leopard, not watching the baby all day.
So evolution basically doesn't care about political correctness. It
Yeah.
doesn't care about fairness.
Not at all. Men are designed for lossy risk-taking. Deep-sea fishing, combat, heavy industry. Riker argues men are the expendable sex, biologically designed to protect the incubators, which are the women. If you try to invert that reality, you get starving tribes and injured children.
So trying to force men into these nurturing roles, like the whole Swedish dad phenomenon we hear so much about it, isn't just social progress. It is actively fighting nature.
That is fighting the hardware. Riker discusses the sexual dimorphism on Bering Sea crab trawlers to drive this home. You've seen that show, Deadliest Catch, right?
Oh, yeah. Huge waves, freezing cold water, crab pots swinging around that weigh 800 pounds. It looks like hell on earth.
Well, Riker points out a very simple observable fact. You will find 0 women on those trawlers during king crab season. Why? Is it workplace discrimination? Is there a literal no girls allowed sign on the boat?
Obviously not.
No. It is because of the 15% upper body strength differential and the massive bone density difference. When a rogue wave hits that deck, that grip strength isn't a vanity metric for the gym. It is the literal difference between holding the railing or being swept into the freezing abyss. You cannot policy right away the fact that men have denser bones and more fast-twitch muscle fiber.
And Riker links this testosterone not just to physical muscles, but to finance, too. We touched on the traders, but he goes even deeper.
He does. High testosterone traders make more profit, but they also take more risks. It's a double-edged sword, but it is a sword that builds empires and civilizations. You need that aggressive variance to innovate and to accumulate resources. Riker's key takeaway in this section is that you cannot legislate biology. If you try to force men into these soft, nurturing roles, you don't get some utopian equality. You just get divorce and deep dissatisfaction.
Which leads us directly into segment 2, the trap of modernity. So you have this biological hardware that absolutely craves risk, struggle, and dominance. That's the engine. But what happens when you take that V8 engine and try to force it to drive at 10 miles an hour in a school zone? You get this massive friction that Riker calls the double bind.
This is the core of the immense frustration for modern men. The double bind is this society explicitly demands men be strong protectors. When a burglar kicks your front door at 3 in the morning, nobody looks at the wife to grab the baseball bat. Nobody says, hey honey, go use your verbal de-escalation skills on the armed intruder.
Right, the man is expected to go downstairs and handle violence with violence.
But simultaneously, society shames men as toxic when they exhibit the very traits, the aggression, the stoicism, the dominance required to be that protector during the day.
And the mechanism for this trap is what Riker calls the vulnerability scam. I think a lot of guys listening are going to violently nod their heads at this, and maybe some people are going to get angry, but we really need to report on this. We're constantly told, just open up, it's okay to cry, share your feelings with your partner and your boss.
And Riker argues it is a lie, a very calculated lie. He cites a statistic that is absolutely chilling to read. 78% of men who cried during layoffs, we were talking about highly stressful corporate downsizing moments, were subsequently flagged as unstable by HR departments.
Hold on, though. I have to push back here, just to play devil's advocate. We have psychologists, major health institutions, everyone saying that men bottling things up is exactly why the male suicide rate is so incredibly high. Is Riker seriously suggesting that not opening up is the healthier option? That sounds like a recipe for a total mental breakdown.
That is the mainstream view, yes. But Riker argues that the breakdown actually comes from the cognitive dissonance. The breakdown comes from being explicitly told it's safe to open up, and then being ruthlessly punished when you actually do. Riker points to the data. While men were flagged as unstable, women who show the exact same emotion, crying, distress, were praised by HR for their authenticity.
Wow.
But it gets so much worse in relationships. This is where the scam really hurts men. Riker points to divorce statistics. Men who showed significant vulnerability in couples therapy, really opening up about their deep fears, their insecurities, crying in front of their wives, saw their divorce rate spike 40%.
40%. So you go to therapy to save the marriage, you do exactly what the licensed therapist tells you to do, you open up, and she leaves you.
She leaves. Because of what Riker terms the ick factor. And he stresses this is biological, it's not malicious on the woman's part. Riker discusses the physiological reaction women have to male crying. It isn't sympathy, it's fear. It causes cortisol spikes in the female brain. It instantly signals a loss of safety.
Because they're wired to seek a protector.
Exactly. Women are biologically wired to seek a competent protector. When the protector crumbles, when the solid rock turns into sand, the attraction just evaporates. It's instinct. Vulnerability is weakness repackaged, and deep down, the reptilian brain totally rejects it.
That is brutal. It goes against literally everything we see in rom-coms and on daytime television. And Riker sees this exact dynamic playing out in the corporate world too, right? He calls it corporate sabotage or the Praxa paradox.
The Praxa paradox, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Praxa refers to practice or action. The paradox is that female-dominated HR departments constantly mandate these vulnerability workshops. They force everyone to sit in the circle and share their feelings. They heavily promote the idea of the empathetic leader. But who actually gets promoted in those companies?
Let me guess. The guys who don't cry.
The stoic men. The men who ignore the workshop, keep a completely straight face, and focus relentlessly on the mission.
He uses Boeing as a massive case study here, doesn't he?
He does. And it is a damning indictment. He contrasts the shift in Boeing's culture, which moved heavily toward emotional leadership, diversity goals, and consensus building, with the toxic but highly effective pest pilots of the past, the whole right stuff era.
Where guys were just screaming at each other over engineering specs.
Right. And the implication Riker makes is that the 737MX disasters were, in large part, a result of a culture that prioritized feelings and psychological safety over cold, hard, confrontational engineering rigor.
Right.
When you can't tell a colleague their code is absolute garbage because it might hurt their feelings, planes literally fall out of the sky.
And he brings up the combat dividend regarding the wage gap. This is a huge point because we hear about the 77 cents on the dollar statistic ad nauseum.
Riker dismantles that completely. He argues that if you control for physical danger, the wage gap disappears entirely. He calls it the combat dividend. Men earn more because they take the dangerous, filthy, life-threatening jobs, coal mining, oil rigs, deep-sea fishing, high-voltage line repair.
So the wage gap isn't discrimination at all.
It's a life insurance premium. Men are actively selling their safety and their long-term health for that extra money. Women, generally speaking, completely refuse those jobs. You do not see a massive push for gender equality in the sewer maintenance industry or on roofing crews in the middle of summer.
That is a really fair point. So we've got the biological hardware and we've got the social trap. Now let's talk about how we actually got here. Segment 3, institutional capture. Riker pulls absolutely no punches here. He squarely blames feminism and the war on merit.
He traces this institutional rot right down to the early childhood education system. He shares this crazy anecdote about Swedish preschools. You know, Sweden is the global epicenter of this gender-neutral experiment.
Oh, I've read about this. They don't use him or her anymore, right? They use hen or some made-up pronoun.
Correct. But Riker talks about a specific case study where boys were being actively punished for what the teachers called toxic creativity. These little boys would be given these gender-neutral dolls, soft, completely featureless dolls. And what did the boys do with them? Did they cradle them and play house?
I'm guessing no.
No. They turned them into siege engines, they pulled the heads off to use them as projectiles, they dismantled them to build crude weapons. The teachers were horrified. They treated normal boy behavior like a literal pathology. But the data Riker cites showed that boys in these heavily gender-neutral environments actually had significantly higher baseline anxiety.
Because they're being told their baseline natural instinct to build, to conquer, to engineer things is inherently wrong. They're being gaslit about their own fundamental nature from age 3.
Exactly. And this philosophy moves right up the chain to the corporate world with the concept of the glass cliff.
I've had this term thrown around, but can you define it in Riker's specific context? What is his take on the glass cliff?
The glass cliff is the well-documented phenomenon where female-led companies tend to fail at a higher rate during major crises. But the mainstream narrative always says it's because women were unfairly given impossible jobs to begin with. Riker argues the exact opposite. He links this to data from mixed-gender firefighting units.
What did the firefighter data show?
It showed that units with women made 3 times more catastrophic errors during active structure fires. Why? Because when the heat is on, literally or metaphorically, you need decisive, strict hierarchical command. You need a singular authoritative voice. Riker argues that the female leadership style, which leans heavily toward consensus and gathering group input, is absolutely fatal in a fast-moving crisis.
Which brings us to the famous Google memo by James Damore.
A textbook example of the diversity trap. Damore was a senior Google engineer who wrote a very calm, reasoned internal memo. He simply pointed out that biological differences like the spatial reasoning advantages we discussed earlier, or a natural interest in systems versus people, might explain why there are fewer female software engineers.
He wasn't even saying one was better than the other.
Not at all. He cited the science. He cited peer-reviewed evolutionary psychology studies, and for that, he was publicly crucified and fired. Riker uses this to show that true meritocracy is being systematically replaced by identity politics. It doesn't matter if you're right, it doesn't matter if the hard data supports you, it only matters if you fit the approved narrative.
And the media plays a huge role in aggressively enforcing that narrative. Riker calls it the media matrix.
It is manipulation mastery. He points to the George Zimmerman tape as a prime example. Most people still don't know this, but the media intentionally edited the 911 call tape to make Zimmerman sound like a totally unprovoked, racist aggressor. They literally cut out the part where the dispatcher explicitly asked him for the race of the person he was following.
They made it sound like he just volunteered it out of nowhere.
Exactly. It's about deceptively editing reality to fit a pre-existing anti-male agenda.
And the crazy part is, brands are doing it to themselves now. The Gillette ad, I will never forget watching that ad and just thinking, do they even know who buys their razors?
The infamous toxic masculinity ad. Riker calls it brand suicide. They actively attacked their core audience men to score cheap political points with a demographic that doesn't even shave their faces. It created a massive outrage cascade, but ultimately, it just destroyed their brand value. Billions of dollars in write-downs.
But Riker suggests there is a way to flip this dynamic on its head. He calls it strategic victimhood.
Yes, using the enemy's attacks as literal badges of honor. He uses Pepe the Frog as a masterclass example. When the SPLC labeled Pepe a hate symbol, sales of Pepe merchandise didn't stop. They absolutely skyrocketed. If the corrupt system calls you a villain, the resistance instantly sees you as a hero. Riker advises men to lean into the criticism. If the mainstream media hates you, you must be doing something right.
Now we have to touch on the legal system because this is where the rubber meets the road. Riker calls it the gynocentric court. This is terrifying stuff for any guy going through a divorce or even just thinking about getting married.
He describes modern family courts as rigged casinos. You walk in, and the house always wins. He introduces the very blunt concept of vagina reparations.
That is a very provocative term.
It is definitely intended to shock the reader, but it perfectly describes the reality of modern alimony. The system is fundamentally set up so men pay for ex-wives who, statistically speaking, initiated the divorce in the first place. Riker cites that 70% of all divorces are initiated by women.
So the woman breaks the contract, she decides she wants to leave, and the man pays the financial penalty for the rest of his life.
It is state-sanctioned asset stripping. It is a massive wealth transfer from the productive male to the dissatisfied female.
And then there are the false accusations.
Which Riker calls a weapon of mass destruction in family court. He cites statistics on false domestic violence claims used specifically to gain leverage in custody disputes. Lawyers will actually advise women off the record to file for a restraining order, even without any history of violence, just to get exclusive possession of the family house.
That is insane.
He brings up the Duke Lacrosse case to highlight this.
Yeah.
A massive media firestorm based on a total lie that completely destroyed young men's lives before the truth could even put its boots on. The institutions are rigged.
It's a total minefield. So if the institutions are captured and the game is this heavily rigged, how do men actually win? Segment 4 covers the logic of leadership and authority architectures. Riker says men must lead. It's not optional.
It's not a preference. It is a strict necessity for human survival. He contrasts NASA's Apollo 13 mission with a Danish all-female submarine crew experiment.
I know the Apollo story well. Gene Kranz, the white vests, failure is not an option.
Right, dictatorial decision-making. Do this, do that. Shut down the fuel cells. No debate. No asking, hey, how does everyone feel about this trajectory adjustment? That rigid hierarchy saved their lives. Then Riker looks at a simulation with a Danish all-female submarine crew.
And what happened there?
When a simulated crisis hit, what happened was complete consensus paralysis. They debated what to do. They wanted to make sure everyone agreed on the next step. And while they were talking and managing feelings, the mechanical problems compounded until the sub theoretically sank. Riker's point is that ships need captains, not committees.
He also tells the story of El Loco in the Chilean mine rescue. This is a story I hadn't heard in this level of detail before.
It's an incredible historical anchor for his argument. 33 miners trapped deep underground. One man, a shift foreman nicknamed El Loco the Madman, just took total charge. Why was he called El Loco? Because he was aggressive, he was difficult, he wasn't a nice guy. But down there in the absolute dark, he immediately rationed the food.
He enforced order.
He enforced order with a literal fist. He completely ignored the emotional first aid advice coming from the soft psychologists on the surface who wanted him to be gentle and accommodating. He was a tyrant in the dark, and because he was a tyrant, 33 men lived to see the sun again. He prioritized paternal outcome over feelings.
So real leadership is about power protocols. It's not just what you say, it's how you physically exist in the space.
Yes. Riker cites a leaked McKinsey report on nonverbal dominance. Executives who hold unbroken eye contact and move with glacier-like slowness close high stakes deals significantly faster. Primal psychology.
Yeah.
If you move fast, you look nervous and prey-like.
Oh.
If you move slow, you look like an apex predator.
And vocal frequency matters too, right?
Huge factor. MIT data shows that deep voices, low hertz, command measurably more authority during a crisis. Think about Sullenberger landing that plane on the Hudson River. Brace for impact. Calm. Incredibly deep. Totally authoritative. If his voice had cracked, if he had sounded panicked or high-pitched, the ensuing chaos in the cabin would have killed people.
And Riker suggests using modern technology to enforce this kind of authority today. He talks about blockchain accountability.
This is a really fascinating modern twist. Using smart contracts to enforce masculine reliability. If you say you'll do something, it is coded on the blockchain. You don't deliver, the contract executes a financial penalty automatically.
It totally kills the flakiness of modern work culture.
Exactly. It's binary. Done or not done. There are no excuses, no sob stories, no HR mediation.
I love that. Make your word bond again, literally. Okay, moving to segment 5. This is the one I know everyone wants to hear about. Sexual market realities and relationships. Riker says women have a winning formula.
And that formula is leveraging male protection while simultaneously decrying it in public. But let's look at the actual dating data. Hypergamy is very, very real.
Can you define hypergamy just for the listeners who might be new to this specific terminology?
Sure. Hypergamy is the biological instinct to marry or date up. It's the evolutionary drive in women to find a partner who has higher status, more resources, or better genetics than themselves. Riker cites massive swipe data from modern dating apps. Women swipe right on only 4.7% of men.
Wait, less than 5%. That means 95% of men are completely invisible to them.
Correct. Meanwhile, men swipe right on 52% of women. Men are broadly looking for a partner. Women are exclusively looking for the absolute top tier. They date up. In sociology, this is called assortative mating. They want a man with higher status, more resources, more physical strength.
But women constantly say they want a nice guy. They say they want equality. I just want a guy who listens and shares the chores.
That is what Riker calls the nice guy fallacy. Watch what they do, not what they say. Riker points to the massive billion-dollar popularity of firefighter and billionaire romance novels. Women publicly say they want soft, equal partners, but their private consumption habits show they respond overwhelmingly to benevolent sexism and dominance.
They want the fantasy of the powerful guy.
They want the firefighter who kicks down the burning door, throws them over his muscular shoulder, and carries them out. They do not fantasize about the guy who asks for a committee meeting before deciding to hold their hand.
And there is biological clock ticking on this entire dynamic, the fertility cliff.
This is the wall. Male fertility extends well into a man's 70s. We see high-status men starting second families late in life all the time. Look at Robert De Niro, look at Al Pacino. But for career women, over 40. It's a biological tragedy. It's a high-cost, extremely low-success nightmare of IVF treatments.
It's grim.
Riker calls it the happiness paradox. Women are statistically much happier when they submit to traditional gender roles and prioritize motherhood early, despite what the feminist fairy tales tell them. The corporate career, the corner office, the power suit, none of it fills the deep void that biology actually designed them for.
Heavy, heavy stuff. But Riker doesn't just diagnose the problem, which is what makes this book different. He gives an actual battle plan. Segment 6, The War Room. Tactics for the Red-Pilled Man. This is highly actionable advice. Let's start with economic enforcement.
You absolutely need a shield. Riker advocates heavily for crypto, but specifically Bitcoin and privacy coins like Monero.
Why specifically those? Why not just put your money in a high-yield savings account or an index fund?
Because a savings account is entirely visible to the state and to the family courts. To hide assets from predatory divorce courts and the IRS, you need cryptographic privacy. If your wealth is in a traditional bank account, an angry judge can freeze it with a single stroke of a pen.
You're completely exposed.
But if your wealth is in Monero on a cold wallet, a physical USB drive buried in your backyard, it is invisible. It's about true sovereignty. He also strongly suggests tangible assets. Gold, physical land, heirloom weapons. Fiat currency is printed infinitely by captured governments. Hard assets are yours.
And he talks about building a fuck you fund.
Essential. You need enough independent wealth to completely ignore HR mandates. If you can't be fired because you don't actually need the job, you become ungovernable. You could speak the absolute truth in a board meeting because you aren't terrified of missing your mortgage payment.
What about legal leverage? How do guys protect themselves in the courts?
The prenup is non-negotiable, ironclad, and you must avoid cohabitation in common law states. Or you might find yourself legally married by accident just because your girlfriend moved her stuff in. Riker also suggests aggressive, offensive lawfare.
Playing their game against them?
Yes. Use GDPR requests, use massive defamation suits. He cites Peter Thiel taking down Gawker as the gold standard. Use paper terrorism to overwhelm opponents who try to cancel you online. If they attack your reputation, drown them in so many legal requests, they go bankrupt defending themselves.
Now, onto physical prowess. Riker gets deep into the biology of plastics here, which I thought was fascinating.
He calls it chemical warfare. He discusses the catastrophic drop in global sperm counts due to artificial estrogens and microplastics in soy diets. You have to aggressively detox. Stop drinking from plastic bottles immediately. Stop eating soy. Stop using scented body washes full of phthalates.
And you need to embrace pain as tuition.
Yes. Sufferfests.
What exactly does he mean by sufferfests?
Routine. Voluntary exposure to extreme discomfort. Ice baths. Sleep deprivation drills. Heavy rucking. Riker argues these practices actually physically thicken the prefrontal cortex. There is hard neuroscience behind this. If you can handle 3 minutes submerged in freezing water, controlling your breath while your central nervous system screams at you to get out, you can easily handle a screaming boss.
You can handle a high-stress negotiation without cracking.
Exactly. It builds a callus over the mind.
And he mentions this concept of heirloom weapon psychology.
This is one of the most fascinating psychological hacks in the book. Holding a grandfather's gun or a forged sword measurably increases a man's testosterone and decision-making speed. It's a concept called temporal binding.
It connects you to a lineage.
It connects you to a lineage of survivors. It physically reminds your brain that you come from a long line of men who fought and bled, not men who tweeted and complained. It literally changes your physiology in the moment you hold it.
Finally, we hit the crisis commandments. If the world goes completely sideways, what do you do?
Home defense is paramount. He preaches the rule of threes for perimeter defense. Lights, locks, lethal. And he emphasizes never underestimating the psychological impact of a pump-action shotgun racking in the dark. It ends violent conflicts before they even start.
And digital sovereignty.
Use dead drops. Avoid digital surveillance at all costs. And practice legacy engineering. You need to build a massive physical library. Riker notes that Napoleon conquered Europe while traveling with a personal library.
Because digital history is fragile.
Digital history can be rewritten, edited, or deleted overnight by the woke mob at Google or Amazon. A physical book is permanent. You need to preserve real knowledge for the rebuilding phase when the institutions finally collapse.
This has been an intensely dense deep dive, so what does this all mean for the listener? We've covered the biology, the societal trap, the institutional capture, the logic of leadership, the reality of women, and the tactical war room.
It means we are living in an anomalous time where normal masculine instincts, the exact things that kept the human species alive for 200,000 years, are being pathologized as a disease. Riker's book isn't just a theoretical guide, it is a vital survival manual for the rational man trapped in a completely irrational world.
Yeah, as you said earlier, the history of human institutions shows they always crumble when they try to ignore basic biology.
They always do. It's an inevitable cycle. You can ignore gravity for a while if you have a big enough engine and enough fuel, but eventually the fuel runs out and you crash back to Earth. Riker offers a blueprint to rebuild, or at the very least to ensure you and your bloodline survive the coming collapse. And you see it happening now. Young boys are already bypassing these captured institutions entirely, finding this truth in unregulated spaces.
Look, we've given you the broad overview today, but you absolutely need the granular details. The algorithms hate this content. They are going to throttle this deep dive eventually. You need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now, today, and buy Hemingway's Masculine Literature. Secure the physical and digital knowledge before it's gone.
And make sure you follow @ConradKrecker on Substack. Join the intellectual resistance against the feminist and Marxist capture of our culture.
Stop apologizing for your nature. Start commanding your life. Check the links in the show notes to get the book. We'll see you on the next deep dive.